grace limits and the big picture, the coming great reckoning as great homecoming. And as you've already discerned, I like to have two titles for things. So, big picture apocalyptimism. What's inevitable, what's inspiring, and what's most important? I suggested last night that if we don't understand what God, reality has been revealing about the big picture, we're going to have a petty and a trivial understanding of the bad news and the good news. So here's just a few visual images. My first book, Earth Spirit, a handbook on nurturing and ecological Christianity, had this on the cover. This is the famous picture of Earth, obviously, from the moon. And then we start moving out a little bit further. This is actually a picture of Saturn. In fact, this is a solar eclipse. The sun is directly behind Saturn. And you know what that dot right there is? Planet Earth. We're looking through the rings of Saturn and able to see Earth in the distance. Talk about a perspective shift, right? This is our closest neighbor galaxy. This is the only galaxy that you can actually see with the naked eye if you know where to look. I do this all the time whenever we're away from city lights, somewhere near the new moon. I love to go out. I know exactly where to find Andromeda Galaxy. And when you see Andromeda, you're seeing it not as it is now, you're seeing it as it was 2 million years ago, because it's taken light traveling 11 million miles a minute, 2 million years to reach our eyes. This is our closest neighbor. This is the famous Hubble Deep Field. This is the ultra deep field photo. This right here is a star, and this right here is a star, but every other dot, no matter how large, no matter how small, are all galaxies. Wow. Some of these are 9 or 10 billion light years away. And most of these galaxies have themselves some 100 to 200 billion stars. And what we're now discovering, just in the last 10 years, we've discovered that a whole bunch of stars have planets. This is the big picture that God is revealing through evidence. Thomas Berry, I love this quote. He says, "For peoples generally, their story of the universe and the human role within the universe is their primary source of intelligibility and value. Only through this story of how the universe came to be in the beginning and how it came to be as it is, does a person come to appreciate the meaning of life and derive the psychic energy needed to deal effectively with those crisis moments that occur in the life of the individual and the life of the society. Such a story communicates the most sacred of mysteries, and not only interprets the past, it also guides and inspires our shaping of the future." Brian Swimme is a physicist, a cosmologist that teaches out in California, who has worked very closely with Thomas Berry. He's a student of Thomas Berry, also a co-author. And I love this quote. He says, "The new cosmic story emerging into human awareness overwhelms all previous conceptions of the universe for the simple reason that it draws them all into a comprehensive fullness. Who can learn what this means and remain calm?" So as I shared yesterday, big history, the epic of evolution, it includes green history. Here again is David Christian and his TED Talk that's garnered nearly 6 million views. Are any of you familiar with the teaching company, the Great Courses? Yeah. Well, Connie and I watched David Christian's 48 half-hour lecture series on the teaching company, on big history. And both of us had the same experience. We both felt it was the single greatest educational experience we've ever had in our lives. Well, what's really cool is when the richest man in the world agrees with you. He says, "I'm a power consumer of instructional videos, DVDs, and downloads on a wide range of subjects. But my favorite course of all time is called Big History, taught by David Christian. I wish everyone could take this course. Big history literally tells the story of the universe from the very beginning to the complex societies we have today. It shows how everything is connected to everything else. It weaves together insights and evidence from astronomy, physics, chemistry, biology, anthropology, history, economics, and more. We are now making an online big history curriculum freely available to high school students throughout the world. And that's what the Big History Project is. And there are very few things I'm more excited about than the Big History Project. Because again, this is the new Genesis. This is our creation story. It also helps us know how profoundly interrelated we are. In fact, when I do programs with kids, my great story beads that I had yesterday, one of the things I talk about is that we're a lot bigger, older, and more related than we have any idea. And the related part is really important because we know all our relations. We know who we're related to. For example, one of my favorite quotes from Marlon Lavenar, he's the pastor of the largest Unitarian church in the world, actually, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. He says, you know, we've all heard some fundamentalist-minded person say, don't tell me I'm related to monkeys. But now that we understand DNA and have cracked its code, we know that we're not just related to monkeys, we're related to zucchini, so let's get over it. And as I mentioned before, if we don't understand green history, that is where the environment is an active agent in human history, we can't understand why all the great axial faiths, all the great religions of the last 2,500 years are so transcendent, otherworldly oriented, and so disparaging of nature. We get that when we understand what the climate was doing and what the environment was doing for thousands of years prior to 2,500 years ago. And oh, by the way, I've recorded the audio of this. The entire book, Anand Viraj allowed me to record the unofficial audio, and he also has a paper that I recorded as well. It's just in 40 minutes, which is a fabulous summary overview of this. And I've also recorded two of the best summaries. One of them is a 60-page summary of a New Green History of the World by Clive Ponting, and both of those can be found, they're all for free, up on my Grace Limits page of my audio. If you just Google Grace Limits Audios. So, let's take a look at the cosmic century timeline. And as I said before, when we compress the history of the universe into 100 years, it helps us get our heads around things. For example, at that time scale, every 10 years, every decade is 1.4 billion years. Each year is 140 million years. Each week, 2.8 million years. Each day is 400,000 years. Each hour is 17,000 years. Obviously, I'm rounding these off. And each minute is 250 years. So at that time scale, at day 2, the first atoms, hydrogen and helium nuclei, form. The early galaxies form here. Supernovas and red giants. This is how the periodic table of elements is formed and how the metal-rich stardust enriches the galaxies. Our solar system, our solar system formed at age 67. Earth cooled below the boiling point of water, and it rained for eons, and all the water was formed. The only new water that's been added is some icy comets that have come and hit in. Bacteria, Earth comes alive at 71. Some of these bacteria at 73 learn to eat the photons of the sun. And then what we call biological evolution, I'm not going to go through all the details, it's all happening here, but what I want to take a look is just the last 4 years on the cosmic century timeline. What has God revealed through evidence, through facts, that there's no dispute about in the scientific community, about the last 4 years in terms of climate, in terms of heat, in terms of carbon dioxide. So this is a temperature of planet Earth over the last 550 million years. This is degrees Celsius. This is degrees Fahrenheit. And it's very easy to read this chart wrong because it's a logarithmic chart. For example, this period here is 550 million years. This is only 75 million years. This is 7 million years. This is 1 million years. This is just 20,000 years. So it takes some practice to learn how to read these kind of logarithmic charts. But for our purposes, it works fine. Because this baseline here is the 1960 to 1990 average for temperature. Okay? The 17 times that the glaciers have come south and the glaciers have gone back, the 17 glacial periods that I talked about, that's this period right here. Okay? The Milankovitch cycles. The Milankovitch cycles, There are 3 measurements that have to do with the Earth's wobble. It spins like a top and it wobbles, and that's one of the main driving forces in glaciers, but only because the Milankovitch cycles happen back here too. It's just that only carbon dioxide has to be below 300 parts per million, in fact usually below 250 parts per million, for glaciers to happen. So here, carbon dioxide was above that, so that's why we didn't have glaciers then. That's why anybody who says, oh, the glaciers are going to come back, they don't know what they're talking about. We're already at 400 parts per million. And again, this is God's evidential word. This is sacred evidential revelation. So how can we confidently say that currently we're on track at 35 to 50 years and in 80 to 100 years to be at these levels? How can we know that? Well, let's take a look at what has been revealed by God, by reality, over the last 800,000 years in terms of carbon dioxide levels. The red line is from Hawaii, and the blue line is from ice cores in the south, at the South Pole, 1990. This is where it passes 350 parts per million. Very consistent. Continuing on, 2005, 2010. We're now at 400 parts per million. Now we're going back in time. We're back into 1960. Now we're going back. Here we are to 1500. Going back 1,000. Here's the last 2,000 years. Okay. Now we go back further. 10,000, 20,000, 30,000. We go back further. We start getting back into the ice ages now. 150, 200,000 years. Here we start seeing the ice ages. Ice age is typically about 185. So this is the last 800,000 years. We've got, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 ice ages. Here we go. Here's where we are now, 400 parts per million. We're already there. And what we now know, what God's revealed through evidence, through science, through global collective intelligence, is that there's a direct correlation between CO2 concentration, global temperature, and sea level rise. And here's where we are now. The reason we can understand and know this is that the last time that CO2 was between 400 and 500 parts per million was this period here. Human beings have only existed since here. We've never lived in a world for very long with this kind of temperature. We're living there now, but there's a time lag. The last time CO2 levels were 400 to 500 parts per million, sea levels were 50 to 150 feet higher than now. That's 3 to 10 miles inland. See, for every foot of sea level rise, it's 300 feet in, is the general rule of thumb. So between 3 to 10 miles inland, and temperature was 2 to 5 degrees Celsius higher, that's 4 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit higher than now. So if we take a look at human history as a whole, again, this is the 100-year timeline. Here we go, December 25th of the 99th year. This is today, January 1st, just turning into the 100th year, right? And we're going out the first week of the 100th year, on the 100th year of the cosmic century timeline. The last week, 2.8 million years, I call it religion 1.0. We got beginnings of orality, hunting and gathering, families, clans, and tribes. This is the authority of elders. Religion 2.0, and everything we know about in terms of civilization, is just from 11:15 p.m. till midnight on this time scale. Horticulture, agriculture, chiefdoms and kingdoms, city-states, empires, writing develops only about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. The Axial religions, religion 2.0, and industrialism. We will either go extinct or, as I believe, we will survive, at least a remnant, and I believe we will last perhaps another 2.8 million years before some asteroid or supervolcano or something takes us out. And if we survive, it will be because we have come home to God, come home to reality. See, it's like the prodigal species. You know, yes, this is the great reckoning, but it's also the great homecoming. Humanity, the prodigal species. We're waking up, we've squandered our inheritance, We're waking up to our predicament, in the pig pen as it were, and we're coming home to God, to reality. So ecotechnic, that is where we use technology, but the technology is pro-future technology. It's technology that helps us pay attention to what our brains are not innately programmed. We're not programmed by evolution to pay attention at size and scale that we now have to pay attention to. And technology that helps us live in a more intimate, personal, healthy relationship with the natural world. I'm not anti-technology. I'm anti-future technology. I'm against any technology that is causing us to damage or destroy the future. I'm all for pro-future technology. So this is the ecotechnic society. Permaculture will be global, worldwide. Agroecology. See, this is where we build soil, where humans have a mutually enhancing relationship with the natural world. But we got some difficult times to go through to get there. So what can we expect in the next minute on the cosmic century timeline? What can we say pretty confidently can we expect? The IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and their worst case scenario is basically we go extinct. Their best case scenario and medium case scenarios, and again that depends on what we do in the next decade, next 15 years, but here's what's considered pretty much inevitable, given what's already baked into the system, what's already locked in the next minute. There is no avoiding climate chaos. No matter what we do, there will be increasing climate chaos. There'll be increased storms, more intense storms, desertification, that is the growing of deserts, and shifts in growing belts and habitability. This is unavoidable. Sea levels will rise at least 25 to 40 feet above current levels. This is now unavoidable. And what this means, this will help cause the kind of economic problems that we will see in the coming decades. It also means we're going to have to move a lot of that toxic stuff that we currently have close to the oceans away. So we won't be successful in all cases, which is why there's a toxic legacy, chemical waste, some nuclear waste, and a contamination of some ocean shorelines. It doesn't mean that the whole oceans are going to be dead, but what it does mean is there will be contamination of some of the ocean shorelines. Population bottleneck. People sometimes say to me, Michael, why have you not addressed the elephant in the room? You've not talked about population. And my response is always the same, which is, you're not going to like what I have to say, that's why I'm not going to talk about population. Because yes, population exacerbates virtually every other problem, no doubt. I don't think we're going to have to consciously choose to deal with it a whole lot, because I think nature's going to do that for us real soon. Just from drought, famine, war, and disease, living in a post-antibiotic age. We are within 20 to 25 years of living in a post-antibiotic age, where our antibiotics don't work anymore. And simple infections can kill us. I think we're likely to see somewhere between 500 million and 2 billion people within the next 250 years on the cosmic century timeline. Infrastructures collapse and mass migrations of people, plants, and animals. It doesn't mean Mad Max. It doesn't mean like total chaos. There will be chaos, but it does mean that we're already seeing, we're 40 years into this, what John Michael Greer calls catabolic collapse. That's the way empires and civilizations collapse. It's catabolic collapse. That is, we overextend what we can afford to maintain, and then we start feeding on ourselves. That's what the collapsing infrastructure is all about, and that will continue. Mass might. What we're seeing now in Syria and Europe is just the beginning. Most of Mexico, most of Central America is expected to be pretty much uninhabitable desert. Where do you think those people are going to go? They're going to go north. They're going to go south. That will happen in the next minute on the cosmic century timeline. The long descent of industrial civilization and the death of techno-utopian faith. The idea that technology is going to save our butts. We don't have to worry about things. See, those are the two great delusions. The delusion of perpetual progress. We don't need to be engaged because everything's just going to keep getting better and better. You know, from the caves to now to the stars. The other delusion is the myth of the apocalypse. We don't need to do anything. The whole thing's going to go to hell in a handbasket anyway. Salvage. Here we start getting to the good news. Salvage and ecotechnic societies, permaculture worldwide, all roads lead local, is the way Richard Heinberg says. All roads lead local. Agroecology, as I mentioned before. See, long after we no longer have the energy to make steel, there's going to be lots of steel available in all of our infrastructure now. And religion 3.0 flourishing. Honoring God, that is, God including nature. Honoring, or God's nature, if you like that language. Honoring primary reality. It's honoring grace limits first. This is what I meant before when I said that the fall of Adam and Eve, the story of the fall of Adam and Eve, isn't about disobedience. It's about dishonoring grace limits. That there's a limit to the resources we can take, and there's a limit to how much of our waste and toxins that can be absorbed. And we have to honor those grace limits. Otherwise, we take ourselves off the path of paradise onto the path of hell. And the only salvation, to speak mythic language, the only salvation is to become Christians, Christ-like, saviors of the future. It's becoming saviors, collectively becoming saviors of the future. It's not sitting around with twiddling our thumbs waiting for some magical thing to happen in the sky. So what's inevitable? What's inspiring? Well, we'll talk about that, and I want to hear from you what you think is inspiring, but here's just a few things I find inspiring. Because then we'll talk about what's most important collectively, and then what's most important individually. And again, as I shared last night, my definition of apocalypticism is we are so screwed. Thank God. A big picture, this epic of evolution, big history, provides a deep time, big family perspective that nourishes an expanded sense of self, wider circles of compassion and commitment, and an inspiring, empowering vision of our role in the body of life. Now, this notion of an expanded sense of self is really vital. Our self doesn't stop with our skin. Our self is the larger body of life, the Milky Way, the universe. That's our larger self, our larger body. In fact, Teilhard de Chardin famously talked about that we are not separate from the universe. We are the universe becoming conscious of itself. Nature uncovering its own nature. This idea that the universe has been expanding and going from simple atoms to more complex atoms, to molecules, to more complex molecules, to creatures, to more complex creatures, to societies and more complex societies. And it's one unfolding, emerging process that we are a part of. We are this process become conscious of itself. Teilhard de Chardin, in his famous book, The Phenomenon of Man, or you could say The Human Phenomenon, Julian Huxley, one of the founders of the American humanist movement, actually a famous atheist, wrote the foreword to Teilhard's book. And Teilhard actually gave him credit for this understanding that we are nature, we are evolution, become conscious of itself. Percy Shelley, though, 100 years before these guys were talking about it, had this great quote. He says, "I am the eye with which the universe beholds itself and knows it is divine." Carl Sagan says, "We are the local embodiment of a cosmos grown to self-awareness. We have begun to contemplate our origins, star stuff, pondering the stars." Brian Swimme, he's got these two great quotes that just help people get this. He says, 4 billion years ago, Earth was molten rock, and now it sings opera. And see, nobody put anything here. When the Bible speaks of God forming us from the dust of the ground and breathing into us the breath of life, right? That's a mythic story. It's a personification that we grow out of the dynamics of the planet itself, and it's God, reality as a whole, that makes that possible. I mean, how could Moses have said it any other way, assuming he wrote that? Now, Brian's got another quote that I just love. It's a little audacious. He says, "You can understand the entire history of the universe in 2 sentences. You take a great cloud of hydrogen gas, and you just leave it alone. And it becomes rose bushes, giraffes, and human beings." Now, if that's not a sacred story, nothing is. Earth is our larger body. It's our larger self. In the same way that your kidney cells and liver cells and heart cells are all a part of a larger being, which is you, we and all life are a part of a larger self. which is our earth cell. This is not so much a picture of a human being looking at the earth, all right? From the earth's perspective, when you realize that we only emerge out of the body of life, humans only emerge out of the body of life in the last week on the cosmic century timeline, or if you want to use religious language, when God created us is in the last week on this cosmic century, right? From this vantage point, this is actually more accurate to say that this is the first time the earth became complex enough that a piece of itself could get off of itself and look back at itself. This is earth looking in the mirror. Joanna Macy has this wonderful quote. She said, this shift, the shift from thinking of ourselves as separate creatures that walk around on earth in a universe, to thinking of ourselves as a mode of being of earth, an expression of the universe. She said, this shift is essential to our survival because it serves in lieu of morality, because moralizing is so ineffective. She says, sermons seldom hinder us from pursuing our self-interest. I mean, as a preacher, I can tell you, I can preach till I'm blue in the face, and people are going to do what's in their own perceived self-interest, regardless of what comes from the pulpit. So Joanna Macy says, what we need is to be a little more enlightened about what our self-interest is. For example, it would never occur to me to say, Tom, don't cut off your leg. No, really, don't cut off your leg. Because his leg is a part of him. He knows that, right? Joanna Macy says, so are the trees in the Amazon basin. There are external lungs. And that's what we're waking up to, is that we are our world. And what we do to our world, we do to our larger body, we do to our larger self. Now, of course, this begs the question, what's our role in the body of life? Is our role just to be good consumers? Is our role just to be a cancer within the body of life? I actually had a young man, he was a medical doctor. He was like 30 years old. He was a medical doctor from Peru. I was doing a program long before I met Connie. And I was talking about that we are the universe becoming conscious of itself. And there was a woman who raised her hand and she said, if we are the universe becoming conscious of itself, why are we destroying the body of life? And I frankly didn't have a great answer. And this young man, I found out later, he was a medical doctor, he raised his hand real vigorously. I was like, go for it. And he said, I'm an oncologist. I work with cancer patients. And here's my layperson's description. He said, cancer is a normal cell. A cancer cell is a normal cell that for a variety of reasons gets cut off or disconnected from its genetic memory. It starts thinking it's separate from the body. And then it starts to consume the body of which it's a part. And of course, if cancer consumes enough of the body, it kills the body, but it kills itself, right? And then he said, what do we call our society? Don't we call it a consumer society? What does to consume mean? It means to eat up. Why are we eating up the planet? Is it because we're bad, rotten, evil, crummy, sinful people? Or is it because, like the cancer, we thought we were separate from it? We didn't know that we were it becoming conscious of itself. And this connection, this big picture, this epic of evolution, big history, is about reconnecting to billions of years of wisdom, divine guidance. See, I believe our destiny is not to be a cancer. I believe it's to be an immune system, where we protect and foster and defend the health and well-being of the larger body of life of which we're a part. And that is a vision. It's not just some pipe dream. In the next 20 years, we will most likely have the technology to be able to deflect incoming intruders, which is the way, mass extinctions. That's humans beginning to become like an immune system within the body of life. And this is a vision that, in my experience, young people can get fired up about. Rather than just beating them over the head with the bad news. When I speak to young people now, I say, you and your generation get to help us become an immune system. See, it's a vision of possibility that's inspiring for them. Now, Thomas Berry used other language. He talked about we are celebrants of the universe story. Now, this is a religious term. Ministers, priests, and rabbis are said to be celebrants. What does it mean to talk about humans as the celebrants of the universe story? Well, think about it from the dinosaurs' perspective. For like 150 million years, the dinosaurs ruled the world. They were the most amazing, majestic beings that have ever existed in Earth's history. And then 65 million years ago, the memory of the dinosaurs was wiped out. This asteroid knocked out the dinosaurs, and for the last 65 million years, no creature on Earth knew anything about the dinosaurs until us. I mean, do you know of any other animal that digs up dinosaur bones and builds monuments to dinosaurs? We do. Here, Connie and I are at the Sternberg Museum. We're clearly having way too much fun. See, we are the memory. We're the recovered memory of matter. We're the story remembering its story. I can trust that our rapacious consumer society will fall of its own weight and allow my soul, my deep self, to be nourished through expressing sadness, anger, fear, and grief. We don't often allow ourselves. We think something's wrong. We should always stay upbeat. Nonsense. It is vitally important that we honor our sadness, our grief, our anger, our fear. This is where we become vulnerable and feel a sense of community with each other, but also where we feel our deep kinship with life. Now I'm just introducing a piece of humor here to sort of lighten things up a minute. If we take a look at the next year, there will be a next year. There will be 140 million years from now. The Milky Way will continue to do what it's doing. Our solar system will continue to go around the Milky Way. Earth will continue to go around the sun. The moon will continue to go around. I mean, this is going to happen. There will be this. And climate change, the Milankovitch cycles, asteroids and supervolcanoes, plate tectonics, all of this is guaranteed. This will continue. In about 10 million years, no matter what damage we do, worst case scenario, all of our nuclear weapons or all of our nuclear power plants just go berserk, right? Worst case. Earth will heal itself. Our worst damage is not going to impact things for more than 10 million years. We're not going to probably last out here or out here or out here. No creature this size does. Raccoons are likely to be the second technological species. And the reason is not only are they so smart, but they also have manual dexterity, which is they'll be able to create tools. Dolphins are really smart. They can't create tools that extend their senses. John Michael Greer wrote a blog post, The Next 10 Billion Years, and he said that the descendants of the corvids, the crows, are likely to be the third technological species, the third self-reflexive intelligence. And by this time, Earth will restore the fossil fuels, so they'll have a lot of cheap, abundant, easily transportable energy. And because crows are already into flying, they'll go to the moon. And the great existential crisis of the crows is when they get to the moon, they'll realize that some species on Earth beat them to it. And it will be a great humbling, which is exactly what they need. It blasts, this big picture blasts the dam of denial and clarifies both our predicament, how we got into this mess, and our way into the future, which is life-centered, pro-future measures of progress and success. That's the most important thing we need to do. I'll say more about that in a minute. It unlocks the evolutionary significance of religion and the religious significance of science, and untrivializes or realizes words like God, guidance, good news, the return of the Lord, things like that. It helps me value dissensus and trust both the process of emergence and the fact that different cells and organs perform a wide variety of vital functions within a body. Dissensus is the deliberate refusal of premature consensus. It's saying that our differences are a really healthy thing because we don't know which of our differences the environment, God, will bless. So we don't know which ones will be most adaptive. So our differences are a good thing. In fact, I sometimes say that, not just humorously, that I would not want my anal sphincter cells and my heart cells to be doing the same thing. The fact that they're playing different roles in my body is a really good thing. It helps me accept that in the words of the Dark Mountain Manifesto, the end of the world as we know it is not the end of the world. Full stop. The Dark Mountain Manifesto, you can Google it. You'll find it's on my Grace Limits page. I've got a number of those things. Sooner or later, we all sit down to a banquet of consequences. See, this is the great reckoning. But as I said, I think that's only half the story, because I think it's also the great homecoming. The prodigal species, after squandering our inheritance, coming home to reality. Now, I'm going to share two things that I think are most important collectively. Yes, it's great that we change our light bulbs and drive less and fly less and eat lower on the food chain and things like that. That's all really great. But what we now need are two major systemic actions. That if we don't do these things, we're going to be in serious, serious trouble. In fact, the first one I think is absolutely vital. We have to shift how we measure success, progress, and growth. We can no longer afford, our planet, the future can no longer afford human-centered measures, anthropocentric measures of success, progress, and growth. I think it's demonic to have short-term, human-centered, anti-future measures of progress. The idea that we can have success and growth at a diminishing planet is insane. It's absolutely crazy. And what's divine is long-term, life-centered, pro-future measures. Is the soil getting healthier and healthier decade by decade? Are we rebuilding forests? Are we replanting forests? Are we restoring wetlands? Are we reducing carbon? These are the measures, the only measures that matter, the only measures that are future. If we want to avoid condemning our grandchildren to hell and engendering their condemnation, we have to do this, and we have to do it soon. In fact, here is a prophet from 40 plus years ago.
Too much and for too long, we seem to have surrendered personal excellence and community values in the mere accumulation of material things. Our gross national product now is over $800 billion a year. But that gross national product, if we judge the United States of America by that gross national product counts air pollution and cigarette advertising and ambulances to clear our highways of carnage. It counts special locks for our doors and the jails for the people who break them. It counts the destruction of the redwoods and the loss of our natural wonder in chaotic sprawl. It counts napalm, and it counts nuclear warheads and armored cars for the police to fight the riots in our cities. It counts Whitman's rifles and Speck's knife, and the television programs which glorify violence in order to sell toys to our children. Yet the gross national product does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It does not include the beauty of our poetry, or the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate, or the integrity of our public officials. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. And it can tell us everything about America, except why we are proud that we are Americans.
Yeah. I think the second most important systemic thing that we need to do is we need to align self-interest and the well-being of the whole. That's how evolution has proceeded to create greater complexity over time, is when the self-interest of the parts and the well-being of the whole, or you could say the self-interest of the whole, are aligned, then the part does well to the whole, it benefits. And if the part harms the whole, it's harmed in some way. So that it's in its own self-interest to do the right thing by way of the whole. It's called consequence capture. That is, the impact of individuals and groups, for good or ill, must be reflected back to them. This is one of the most important things we need to do, which is individuals, corporations, and nation states that disregard or harm the common good should be taxed or penalized, or there should be moral strictures. Individuals, corporations, and nation states that do well to the larger common good should benefit. And the more good they do, the more they should benefit. So they're incentivized to do as much good as possible. See, what this does is it creates a system where the cheaper, easier, more convenient thing to do becomes the right thing to do. Right now, the cheaper, easier, more convenient thing to do is usually the wrong thing to do, because we have not aligned self-interest at multiple levels. And if you want to know the best articulation of this one here, just Google the Self-Organizing Society, a Grower's Guide. It's written by a friend of ours, Jon Stewart, not Jon Stewart the comedian, but Jon Stewart, an Australian. And it's fabulous. I think this is vitally necessary. So what's most important individually? Let me conclude, sort of begin to wind things down here. What can we say is most important individually? Well, one is to learn and feel together. Feeling the stages of grief with others, not alone. Finding strength and support in community. It's so vital to honor these darker, more difficult, more painful emotions, and to do so in community, to learn and feel together. And as I said, my favorite, what I recommend to everybody is allow John Michael Greer to guide you through. What I promise you is this: if you were to make a decision to spend at least 15 minutes a day reading his blog post or listening to them. I've recorded virtually every blog post he's written, like 400 blog posts. So you can listen. If you have an iPod, my Grace Limits page, he's my favorite guide for going through the stages of grief. And again, here's the Grace Limits page. I invite you to make a spiritual practice of spending at least 15 minutes a day, if not a half hour a day, with this material. It will nourish your soul and enrich your mind. See, here are some of the authors that I have. John Michael Greer, William Catton. I mentioned before that I consider this the single most important book I've ever read in my life. William Catton's book, Overshoot. William Ophuls has written some of the most masterful stuff on ecological politics. If you want to know how politics must shift, and will shift post-collapse, it's not going to happen before the collapse, William Ophuls is the best. Walter Youngquist, these are how we relate to the renewable and non-renewable resources. It's vital. Richard Heinberg, Thomas Berry, my great mentor, Joanna Macy, Miriam McGillis, Dolores LaChapelle, and Lynn Margulis. These are the 4 great female mentors of my life. I've had the opportunity of studying with them and being trained by them. Green history, environmental history. I mentioned before, I've got Anand Viraj's book recorded. I've also got summaries of the other one. Collapse, how and why civilizations are mortal and die. It's vital for understanding why civilizations are not immortal. It's kind of like, imagine that you're 75 years old, but you don't understand the process of dying. And so you think you ought to be like a 35-year-old. You're out of touch with reality. Well, if we're in the declining and dying years of industrialism, which we are, but we think that we're out of touch with reality. So it's important to understand this. Why technology won't save us or the environment, and countering eco-modernism, techno-fetishism. These are related. The Dark Mountain Project, I mentioned before. I've got a number of things written, posted. So anyway, so check out. There's all kinds of stuff here at the Grace Limits page. Work together. In a planetary emergency, collective action matters more than individual actions. Find ways in your township, your county, find ways of working together, not just sort of internationally. Most of us don't have a lot of power in that, but we can all make a difference locally. And I encourage you to do that together with others. And stand together. It is through social movements and citizen involvement that real pro-future change can happen. But don't be discouraged if we don't change everything. We're not. We're going to hit the wall. Questions, comments, feedback?
I want you to tell us again about finding something to love. And I want to ask you, we know that the dinosaurs became extinct, and there is a possibility we are just another species of also becoming extinct. But I think about the fact that we're the only species, even though some of the poetry that you've showed us is so beautiful, these eloquent, wonderful people. How, is there something wrong with us? Are we flawed? Should we come back? There's no other animals that destroys their environment.
One of the great mistakes is exactly your last sentence. Every other animal would do what we're doing if they had symbolic language. We are not uniquely evil. We are not uniquely stupid. We are not uniquely bad. This is the point. Why William Catton's book Overshoot brought me to tears 4 times. And you can, if you listen to my recording of it, you'll hear when I'm crying. Why I was so moved by his generosity of soul is he keeps pointing out that we are doing what biological creatures would do. All creatures would do this if they were in our shoes with our powers. See, most other creatures are checked by the environment. They can't overshoot in a total way the way that we have. We've overcome all the things that would constrain us. So now we have to constrain ourselves. No other creature has needed to do that. So in that sense, we are in a unique opportunity and a unique challenge. This is why this is why religion needs to be saved. Religion needs a born-again experience. And it's not going to happen as long as we think of old men and old books as where it's all at. But we're not uniquely bad or evil. And you're right, we might go extinct. There's no, it may be that the raccoons have to take over sooner.
I would like some clarification on one of your slides. You had mentioned, as you were talking about population problems and so forth, you had a number that was 500 million to 2 billion. Mm-hmm. Does that mean how many people will die or what the remaining population will be?
Yeah, great question. The most important theological concept is carrying capacity. Grace limits. Now, most people don't think of it. It's an ecological concept. Most people don't think of it as a theological concept. But again, ecology is the new theology. It will be for the future. Let me say it this way. Any religion that doesn't very quickly make ecology at the heart of its theology will be a theology that our grandchildren will condemn. We have 7 billion human beings, and the carrying capacity of planet Earth is somewhere between 500 million and 2 billion. The Earth can't support more than 2 billion human beings. It's possible that now, because of the damage we're doing, it won't even be able to support 500 million. And so the only reason that we can be temporarily exceeding carrying capacity is because we're drawing on ancient energy. And as that declines, which it already has, we reach the peak of conventional petroleum production in 2005. It's been plateaued and we're now on the decline, and all other energy forms. We're now peak everything, or virtually everything. And so as this happens, we will now, the Earth, there will be a corrective. The second book by William Catton is called Bottleneck. This is the bottleneck century. There will be a die-off. Doesn't mean everybody's going to die all at once. In fact, John Michael Greer, in his book that's coming out in 6 months called Dark Age America, the first chapter is Dark Age America, climate. The second one is Dark Age America, oceans, rising seas. The third one is our bitter legacy. And the fourth one is on population. 100 years from now, we might only have 1 billion. This demographic can happen, and it will happen.
We have a daughter-in-law who's a director at the CDC. She says... Your
daughter-in-law is the director
no,
of the
is a director.
Oh, okay.
It's,
yeah.
One of those corporate
structures.
Yeah. She says, don't worry about it. She says there are pockets in the world where disease is developing that will take 80% of us out.
Well, that's a comforting note.
Don't worry about it.
Yes.
Just a point of view.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, living in a post-antibiotic age, and also living in a warming world where dengue fever and malaria, this is coming our way. Zika, right? Zika, my gosh, yes.
From what you said yesterday, it sounded like that you do not believe in an afterlife. That's what I got. No,
I don't have a trivial view of the afterlife. I don't believe that Michael Dowd's consciousness survives death. That's true. But my body...
What about a soul?
Well, remember the song that I shared by Peter Mayer, My Soul? Mm-hmm. My soul, I interpret my soul not in an otherworldly way, but my soul is the universe. Of course there's an afterlife. My larger body is going to continue after this guy dies. And my atoms, all my molecules, so my legacy, my kids and their gene, my genetic legacy, my mimetic legacy, my ideas, and even the atoms and molecules of my body go back to God, go back to reality. So I don't believe in an afterlife, nor do I disbelieve in an afterlife. I know there's an afterlife, that is, there's life after me, and I know that I go back into the whole process in the same way that your kidney cells and liver cells and heart cells and toe cells are constantly dying into the process, yet you continue. So too do all we die, and yet our larger body continues.
But certainly the concept of an afterlife, a soul, and in some instances reincarnation is built into the theologies that we have.
Yeah.
And that seems at odds with what you're saying.
It's profoundly at odds with what I'm saying, because God has revealed things in the last 500 years about mortality and death that the Buddha didn't know, that Jesus didn't know, that Muhammad didn't know. We have got to update our theologies about from what God's been revealing. Now, I will say this. There are two important distinctions, and I'm really glad you asked the question and we've got the time to deal with it, because I hadn't planned on touching on these in this program. One is the distinction between practical truth and factual truth. Practical truth is what religion specializes in. It's truth that if you act as if it's true, you experience personal wholeness and social coherence. Your life works, and your tribe or your culture, your religion works. Personal wholeness and that's what all religions are practically true. No religion is factually true, not one. Science deals with what's factually true. That's what's measurably true. What atheist scientists, Buddhist scientists, Christian scientists, Hindu scientists, scientists of all different religions and no religion can all agree that, yeah, this is true. That's factual truth. But factual truth will kill us if it's not interpreted as practically true. That's why our science and technology have a dark side. They're helping us destroy the planet ever more effectively. So that's why this practical truth, factual truth, and I get this for the while, but this isn't Michael Dowd. One of the leading evolutionary theorists in the world, David Sloan Wilson, talks about this. But the other distinction that I think is important is day and night language. Day language reflects our everyday experience. Night language reflects our nighttime experience. And as we all know, the two are very different. We do things at night that we can't do during the day. If I fly in my dreams, I'm not having a supernatural experience. I'm having an experience common to the dream state. Right? And so if we interpret these religious stories, for example, resurrection and reincarnation are both night language that point to something that's real about the nature of reality, but we trivialize them if we interpret them literally. The idea that some soul goes from one person to another person, or from one being to another being to another, that's not factually true, but it can be practically true. That is, if I act as if it's true, I can live my life in a way that's better than if I don't believe that. Same thing with resurrection. The same thing is the view of the final judgment. The idea that we're all going to be judged on the final day is practical truth. That is, if I act as if it's true, I'm probably going to live a more ethical life than if I think there's no accountability. So these stories, I'm not saying we should reject these stories, these interpretations, these practical truth. I am suggesting that we need to honor what God's been revealing through evidence, and we need to realize that what matters most is not the cult of individualism. The idea that what it's all about is my salvation or my enlightenment. No. The reason that our religious traditions such as Buddhism and Christianity evolve, and other faiths as well, evolve with this intense focus on the individual, and you're going to get this if you read Green History of Religion by Anand Biraraj or listen to my recording of it, is that the political and economic systems that were in place, that were locked in place, that were not going to be changed, were already so demonic, already so rapacious, already so unjust, That the only thing that mattered in terms of practical truth was to have this enlightened, get saved out of the world, this transcendent, otherworldly, this world is just passing away. All that makes sense. But what we now realize is the most important thing is our legacy. It's legacy consciousness. It's the recognition that we as individuals and we as a species have a legacy. And so if we attend to our legacy first, that's what I meant when I said, make your legacy your Lord. If we attend to our legacy first, we become Christians, saviors of the future, rather than just pursuing our own self-interest, because our instincts are killing us. And if we just pursue our self-interest, we will naturally and inevitably damage and destroy the future.
May I follow up?
Sure.
I believe that a practical view allows us to dream.
Allows us to dream.
If we relied strictly on the factual side of science, we would, for example, never put a man on the moon because it was not practical. It couldn't be done. And yet, in the dream, we accomplished that.
I am so totally in your camp. I am so with you on that. When I speak of humanity as the prodigal species, I'm speaking mythically. I'm dreaming. I'm not speaking factual truth. I'm deeply in favor of all the arts and poetry and all the things that touch our hearts and move our souls. I sometimes call myself an evidential mystic. I'm not a materialist. I'm an emergentist. What I trust, my faith, is in this billions of years long process of evolutionary emergence. Hydrogen, oxygen come together and then something wholly new emerges, water. We see this emergence happening over and over again. It's a sacred process, and there's a mythic component of it. You're absolutely right, there's a dream. In fact, we are not merely led by our past, we are led by by our dreams, by our visions. What's that phrase? Without a vision, the people perish. Without some kind of a positive vision, this is why I'm trying to offer a big picture perspective that allows you to face the bad news, but not be despaired and just freaked out about it, but then find ways to love something, learn something, let go of something, and carry something forward. I started to share my own story on that. Loving something was these 400 baby trees. These were my baby trees. Learning something. For the last 2 years, I've been learning about the rise and fall of civilizations. I've been learning the things that are on that grace limits page. And then I was so blown away and inspired and like, oh my God, everybody needs to know this, that I've spent somewhere between 1,000 and 15 hours recording all this stuff. Unofficially. I've let the publishers and the authors know I'm doing it, and they're all sort of privately applauding me and are grateful, even though I can't technically, legally do it, but I'm not charging anything. It's all free. So loving something, learning something. I've been learning about the rise and fall of civilizations, for example. William Ophuls has a little 75-page book. 75 pages. I can read it in 2 hours. I did read it in 2 hours. It's called Immoderate Greatness, Why Civilizations Fail. And he takes this mountain of literature and sums it up in 75 pages. 6 chapters, the 6 reasons why civilizations fail, and why ours will fail and is failing. So I agree that we need a mythic vision.
What are the other 3 L's after love?
Yeah. Oh, thank you. So love something, learn something, let go of something. John Michael Greer's book, the latest one, is Collapse Now and Avoid the Rush. Right? It's finding ways to let go of some of the comfort, some of the ease, some of the privilege, some of the things that we have ahead of time. Not because you have to, because you don't have to yet, but you get to. And there's something that happens to our souls when we choose to let go of something that pretty soon we're all going to have to let go of anyway. For example, Connie and I were reading one of the chapters in Collapse Now and Avoid the Rush, and I've recorded the entirety of that book in audio with John Michael Greer's permission. It's also up on my Grace Limits page. And you can actually hear, there's one chapter, I think it's like the 5th chapter from the end, where he says, now, dear reader, I invite you to go to your thermostat. We were reading this in the middle of the winter. He said, I invite you to go to your thermostat and turn it down 3 degrees from what you normally keep it on. And I started to cry. You can hear me. And I walked downstairs. I left the mic going. I walked downstairs. I turned the thermostat 3 degrees down. Walked back upstairs. And I start reading again. And from that day, that was a year and a half ago, from that day, Connie and I have kept the thermostat in the winters down 3 degrees. And in the summer, we try not to use air conditioning at all, or if we do, we have it 3 degrees warmer than we normally would. It's just a little thing. I fly very little. I hardly ever fly anymore, except if it's some large event where I can make a big leverage difference, or like it's a family event, like I flew for my wedding that I married my niece.
You didn't marry your niece.
Oh, I didn't marry my niece, right. I performed the...
You're married to me.
I was the officiant, yes. Connie's corrected me on that before, and okay, yes. I did not marry her. I was the minister for my niece's wedding. So again, love something, learn something, let go of something, and carry something forward. You have some skill, you have some knowledge base, you have something that would be valuable to pass on. Find some young person to mentor. See, again, this is legacy consciousness. It's finding something to pass on. Some body of knowledge or whatever. If you know how to knit, especially things that in a collapsing economy, like let's say we go through a depression. Like let's say sometime in the next year or two, which if you don't think it's possible in the next year or two, you're not paying attention. We could have something like 1929 or 1933. If that's the case, what skills or talents do you have, what knowledge base that would be useful to pass on? And then in the larger perspective, I can tell you personally, okay? Here's what I'm trying to pass on. What we know, there have been 25 civilizations, complex civilizations, that have been young in their youth, powerful, and then their own greatness becomes their own undoing. That's why William Ophel's book, A Moderate Greatness. Civilization's greatness is always what ultimately is their own undoing. I love John Michael Greer's definition of hubris. The overweening pride of the doomed. Right? And so for me, carrying something forward is the recognition that in every previous example that we know about, the knowledge, the things that were created at the height of that culture, the great gifts of that culture, didn't survive the Dark Age unless it was sacralized. It was made sacred. And so I'm committed that ecology and evolution, the science of ecology and the science of evolution, become sacralized so that people will copy. If we no longer have publishing houses and people are handwriting things to pass on the information for several hundred years during the Dark Age that's coming, right? We will do that with things that we call sacred, that we hold as more precious than our own lives. So love something, learn something, let go of something, and carry something forward.